The mop moved slowly across the polished floor of Fort Carson's main headquarters, pushed by hands that had seen more decades than most soldiers on the base had seen years. The man guiding it wore a faded gray uniform, with a name tag that simply read Mitchell. No first name, no rank, just Mitchell. He arrived before sunrise. Every morning, worked through his shift without complaint, and left after dark. Most people didn't notice him. The ones who did barely gave him a second glance. Just the old janitor. The man who emptied trash cans and scrubbed floors while officers discussed tactics and privates complained about duty rosters. He never spoke, unless spoken to. Never offered opinions. Never corrected anyone even when they were wrong. He was invisible by choice, a shadow moving through hallways where decisions were made and orders were given. Until the day a three-star general walked through those doors, saw his face and froze. The general's briefcase hit the floor. His aide stopped mid-sentence. And in a voice that carried through the entire building, the general said 5 words that changed everything. "Captain Mitchell? Is that you?" His name was Robert Mitchell and he was 68 years old. He had been working as a janitor at Fort Carson for 17 years. Before that, he had worked at a hardware store. Before that, he had driven a truck. And before all of that, in a life that felt like it belonged to someone else entirely, he had been Captain Robert Mitchell, United States Army Special Operations. Nobody at Fort Carson knew that. Nobody asked. And Robert never volunteered the information. He had left that life behind 3 decades ago, folded it up like an old uniform and stored it somewhere deep where memories couldn't reach him every single day. He had his reasons. Reasons that woke him up at night. Reasons that made him prefer the quiet hum of a floor buffer to the sharp crack of gunfire that still echoed in his mind. The base was busy that morning, busier than usual. Word had spread that a new commanding general was arriving for an inspection tour. Officers rushed through hallways with clipboards. Sergeants barked orders at privates who scrambled to make everything perfect. Robert stayed out of the way as he always did. He mopped the east corridor, emptied the trash in the conference rooms, and wiped down the windows in the main lobby. A young lieutenant passed him without a glance, talking rapidly into his phone. "No, I need those reports on my desk in 20 minutes. The general's going to be here any second." Robert moved his mop bucket aside to let the lieutenant pass. The man didn't say thank you. Didn't even acknowledge him. Robert didn't mind. He was used to it. A few minutes later, a staff sergeant hurried by, nearly knocking over Robert's cleaning cart. "Watch it, old man," the sergeant muttered, not slowing down. Robert steadied the cart and went back to work. Invisible. Unremarkable. Exactly how he wanted to be. The main doors opened with a sharp sound that echoed through the lobby. Robert glanced up from his mop just for a second. A group of officers entered, uniforms crisp, postures rigid. In the center walked a man in his early 50s, 3 stars gleaming on his shoulders. Major General David Crane. Robert recognized the look. Confident, composed, a man who had earned every piece of metal on his chest. The general moved with purpose, his aides flanking him, his eyes scanning the building as if cataloging every detail. Robert lowered his gaze and kept mopping. Generals didn't notice janitors. That was the natural order of things. He dipped the mop into the bucket, wrung it out, and continued his work. The general's voice carried through the lobby as he spoke with the base colonel. "I want a full operational briefing at 1400 hours. And I need to see the training schedules for every unit under this command." "Yes, sir," the colonel replied. "Everything's prepared." Robert stayed in the corner, working quietly. The entourage moved past him toward the main corridor. He was invisible. Safe. Forgotten. Except he wasn't. The general stopped walking. His aide, mid-sentence about logistics, fell silent. The base colonel, who had been gesturing toward the operations wing, froze. Major General Crane turned slowly, his eyes fixed on the old man with the mop. Robert felt the stare before he saw it. A prickle on the back of his neck. The same instinct that had kept him alive in firefights and ambushes decades ago. He looked up. The general's face had gone pale. His briefcase slipped from his hand and hit the tile floor with a loud thud. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then the general's voice cut through it, loud and certain. "Captain Mitchell? Is that you?" Robert's hands tightened on the mop handle. His heart pounded in his chest. He hadn't heard that name, that rank in 30 years. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The general took a step forward, his eyes never leaving Robert's face. "It is you," the general said, his voice softer now, filled with something close to disbelief. "Robert Mitchell. Charlie Company. Operation Sand Viper." The base colonel looked confused. The aides exchanged glances. A few junior officers who had gathered to witness the general's arrival stood frozen, unsure of what was happening. Robert swallowed hard. He wanted to disappear. Wanted to fade back into the walls. But the general wasn't going to let that happen. "Sir," Robert said quietly, his voice rough from years of silence. "I think you've mistaken me for someone else." The general shook his head slowly. "No mistake, Captain. I'd know your face anywhere. You saved my life." The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. The base colonel's mouth opened slightly. The aide stared. And Robert Mitchell, the invisible janitor, felt the weight of 3 decades come crashing down on him. Major General Crane turned to the assembled officers. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. Respect, gratitude, something deeper. "This man," he said, gesturing to Robert, "is the reason I'm standing here. Today." He looked back at Robert. 1993, Gulf War. Our convoy was ambushed outside Basra. We were pinned down, outnumbered, taking heavy fire. We had 3 wounded, no air support, and about 10 minutes before we were overrun. He paused, his jaw tight. Captain Mitchell led a rescue team through enemy lines. He pulled us, all of us, under fire. In the dark. When command had already written us off as lost. The room was silent. Robert stood with the mop still in his hands, his face unreadable. The general continued. "I was a second lieutenant back then. Green. Scared out of my mind. And this man looked me in the eye and told me, 'You're going home, Lieutenant. That's an order.'" The general's voice cracked slightly. "He carried me half a mile on his back while bullets tore up the ground around us. He didn't stop. Didn't hesitate. He just kept moving." Robert finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "You did the hard part, sir. You held on." The general shook his head. "No, Captain. You did the impossible. And then you just disappeared. No commendation ceremony. No Medal of Honor. You were just gone. We heard you retired quietly. I tried to find you. Never could." Robert looked down at the mop in his hands. "I didn't want to be found, sir." The general studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, he straightened to attention. His right hand came up in a sharp, formal salute. The kind reserved for the highest respect. The aides followed instantly. Then the base colonel. Then every officer in that lobby. One by one, they snapped to attention and saluted the old man with the mop. Robert stood frozen. He hadn't been saluted in 30 years. Hadn't worn a uniform. Hadn't carried a rank. It was just the janitor. But now, in this moment, he was something else. Something he had tried to bury. Slowly, almost reluctantly, Robert set the mop down. He straightened his back, rolled his shoulders, and returned the salute. It was crisp, precise. The salute of a man who had once commanded soldiers in the worst conditions imaginable. When he lowered his hand, the general did too. But he didn't move. He just stood there looking at Robert with an expression that carried years of gratitude and unanswered questions. "Why here, Captain?" the general asked. Quietly. "Why a janitor?" Robert glanced around the lobby at the faces staring at him. Then he looked back at the general. "Because I wanted to be useful without being seen, sir. I did my part. I just wanted to do it quietly." The general nodded slowly as if he understood something unspoken. "You were the best officer I ever served. Under Captain. Even when I outranked you years later, I still thought of you as the standard." Robert gave a faint smile. "You turned out just fine, sir." The general extended his hand. Robert hesitated, then reached out and shook it. The handshake lasted longer than protocol required. It was the grip of 2 men who had seen the same darkness and survived it. Over the next few days, everything changed. The story spread through Fort Carson like wildfire. The janitor wasn't just a janitor. He was a decorated combat veteran. A former captain who had led one of the most dangerous rescue missions in Gulf War history. Soldiers who had walked past him for years now stopped to shake his hand. Officers who had ignored him now asked for his advice. The base colonel personally apologized for never asking about his background. Robert didn't want the attention. He tried to go back to his routine, mopping floors, emptying trash, keeping to himself. But it was different now. People saw him. A young private approached him one afternoon while he was cleaning the break room. The private stood awkwardly, helmet in hand. "Sir, Mr. Mitchell, I just wanted to say thank you. My dad served in the Gulf. He talks about guys like you. Said you were the real heroes." Robert set down his cleaning rag. "Your dad's right. The real heroes are the ones who didn't come home. I just did my job." The private nodded, his throat tight. "Still means something, knowing you're here." Robert looked at him for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "It means something to me too. Seeing you in that uniform. Knowing the work continues." A week later, Major General Crane invited Robert to his office. It wasn't an order, just a request. Robert hesitated, then accepted. The office was large, filled with maps and commendations and photographs of units, past and present. The general gestured to a chair. "Sit, please." Robert sat. The general poured 2 glasses of water and handed one to Robert. Then he sat across from him, not behind the desk but in the chair beside him. Equal footing. "I need to ask you something," the general said. "And I need you to be honest with me." Robert nodded. "What? Did you leave? You had a career ahead of you. You could have been a colonel. Maybe more. Why walk away?" Robert was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but heavy. "Because I lost too many, sir. Good soldiers. Young men who trusted me. We won the missions, but I kept counting the faces that didn't come back. After a while, I couldn't separate the victories from the losses. I couldn't sleep. Couldn't think. So I left before I made a mistake that got more people killed." The general absorbed that. "You never made a mistake, Captain. Not one. Your record was perfect." Robert shook his head. "Nobody's perfect, sir. I just got lucky. And I didn't want to push that luck until it ran out." The general leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "And the last 30 years? Mopping floors and emptying trash cans." Robert gave a faint smile. "Peaceful. Quiet. Nobody dies because I made a wrong call. I get to watch young soldiers train and know they're in good hands. And at the end of the day, the floors are clean and my conscience is clear." The general considered that. Then he asked, "Do you regret it? Leaving?" Robert thought about it. Then he said, "No, sir. I don't. I did my part when it mattered. Now someone else is doing theirs. That's how it's supposed to work." The general smiled. "You're still teaching, Captain. Even if you don't realize it." Robert raised an eyebrow. "How's that, sir?" The general gestured toward the window, toward the base beyond. "Because now, every soldier on this base knows your story. They know that heroism doesn't always wear stars. That some of the best leaders are the ones who walk away quietly when the job is done. That's a lesson they won't forget." 2 weeks later, the base held a small ceremony. It wasn't mandatory. It wasn't flashy. Just a quiet gathering in the main courtyard. Major General Crane presented Robert Mitchell with a long-overdue commendation for his service during Operation Sand Viper. The medal wasn't new. It had been authorized decades ago but never delivered. The general had tracked it down himself. Robert stood in his gray custodial uniform, no dress blues, no polished shoes. Just the man he had been for 17 years. The general pinned the medal to his chest and saluted. Robert returned it. And then one by one, every soldier in that courtyard saluted too. Not because they were ordered to, but because they wanted to. Because they understood what it meant to serve without recognition. To lead without glory. To be a hero in the shadows. After the ceremony, Robert went back to work. He picked up his mop, filled his bucket, and returned to the main building. A young sergeant saw him and offered to help. Robert smiled and declined. "I've got it, Sergeant. But thank you." The sergeant nodded and walked away. Robert started mopping, the familiar rhythm calming his mind. He was still the janitor. Still invisible to most. But now, when people passed him, they paused. They nodded. They saw him. And for Robert Mitchell, that was enough. He didn't need parades or promotions. He didn't need his name on a wall. He just needed to know that his service mattered. That the lives he saved went on to save others. That the quiet work he did now, cleaning floors and keeping the base running, was still part of something bigger. That evening, as the sun set over Fort Carson, Robert locked up his cleaning cart and headed toward the parking lot. A young private jogged up to him. "Mr. Mitchell?" Robert stopped. "Yes." The private handed him a folded piece of paper. A bunch of us wanted you to have this. Robert unfolded it. It was a letter signed by over 50 soldiers. It read, "Thank you for showing us that heroism doesn't fade. It just changes form." Robert read it twice. Then he folded it carefully and tucked it into his pocket. He looked at the private. "Tell them thank you. And tell them to keep their heads down and their eyes sharp. That's the real job." The private saluted. Robert returned it. Then he walked to his truck, climbed in, and drove home. The medal sat on the passenger seat beside him. He didn't hang it on the wall when he got home. He put it in a drawer with his old dog tags and a few faded photographs, reminders of who he had been, but not who he was now. Robert Mitchell was a janitor, and he was at peace with that, because sometimes the greatest leaders are the ones who walk away from the spotlight, who trade command for quiet service, who mop floors with the same discipline they once used to lead men through fire. And when the world finally sees them, it realizes that rank and recognition were never the point. The mission was the point, and some missions last a lifetime.